I was 48 hours away from becoming a millionaire when my career imploded. 4 years of meticulously building Neurotech's compliance systems, preparing us for this $800 million acquisition. Every regulation followed, every document verified. When the founder's niece, Stephanie, called me to her office, I expected gratitude for my thorough due diligence work. Instead, she slid a document across the table, her lips curling into a smirk. "We discovered your after whores contract. Box your desk." I felt the floor drop beneath me. Someone had set me up. I joined Neurotech 4 years ago when it was just a promising startup with 20 employees crammed into a renovated warehouse space in Austin. The founder, Patrick Adams, recruited me personally from my comfortable position at a Big Four accounting firm. His pitch was compelling. "Melanie, we need someone who understands compliance from day one. Too many startups get sloppy, then pay for it later. I want to build this right." Patrick was a visionary in neural interface technology. His breakthrough algorithms had created a non-invasive way to interpret brain signals for medical applications. The technology was revolutionary. But the regulatory landscape was treacherous. Neurotech sat at the intersection of medical device regulation, data privacy laws, and emerging AI governance frameworks. I built our compliance systems from scratch as we grew from 20 to 400 employees. Every hire, every contract, every line of code was documented according to the strictest standards. Some colleagues rolled their eyes at my thoroughness, but Patrick always backed me up. "Melanie keeps us honest," he would say in all-hands meetings. "One day, you'll thank her when we exit clean." That day seemed to be approaching. When DataCorp, the industry giant, expressed interest in acquiring us, $800 million. The figure made my head spin. My equity stake would vest immediately upon acquisition. I would walk away with nearly $2 million. But first, we had to get through due diligence. And as the legally designated attester for regulatory compliance, I was the linchpin. In tech acquisitions involving medical applications, federal regulations required a certified compliance officer to personally attest to the accuracy of all disclosures. My signature carried legal weight beyond normal corporate documentation. Things changed 8 months ago when Patrick brought his niece Stephanie Adams into the company as Chief Strategy Officer. She had an MBA from Wharton and experience at a top consulting firm, but from day one, there was friction between us. She found my rigorous compliance protocols excessive and deal killers. "We need to be nimble, Melanie," she would say, dismissing my concerns about documentation. "The valley runs on speed. Perfect is the enemy of done." As the acquisition talks with DataCorp intensified, Stephanie inserted herself into every aspect of the process. She rescheduled meetings without telling me, redirected my team members to other projects, and began filtering communications between me and Patrick. The first serious red flag appeared 3 weeks before the scheduled close date. I was working late, reviewing financial disclosures that would be presented to DataCorp's due diligence team, when I noticed discrepancies in the revenue recognition model. Certain customer contracts had been reclassified, pulling forward revenue that should have been recognized over longer periods. The next morning, I confronted Stephanie in the break room. "Did you see my email about the revenue recognition issues?" I asked, keeping my voice low. She stirred creamer into her coffee without looking up. "Oh, those are just minor adjustments to align with industry standards. Nothing to worry about." "But they contradict statements I already signed off on," I insisted. "We need to correct this before the DataCorp team arrives." Stephanie finally looked at me, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Melanie, you're overthinking this. These are standard pre-deal adjustments. Every company does it, not ones I attest to," I said firmly. "I need to talk to Patrick about this. He's swamped with strategic discussions. I'll mention your concerns, but honestly, we need to focus on getting this deal done. Everyone's future depends on it." She walked away before I could respond. That evening, I stayed even later, digging deeper. What I found made my stomach drop. 3 compliance documents contained my electronic signature on statements I had never approved. Someone had applied my authentication credentials to modified documents. This wasn't just aggressive accounting, it was potential fraud. As the designated attester, I could face personal liability if these documents were submitted to regulators as part of the acquisition. I messaged Franklin, our head of IT security and one of my few allies in the company. Can you check the system logs for anyone accessing my authentication credentials in the last 2 weeks? His response came quickly. That's an unusual request. Everything okay? I explained my concerns, and Franklin promised to look into it discreetly. But by morning, he stopped responding to my messages altogether. When I passed him in the hallway, he averted his eyes and quickened his pace. Something was very wrong at Neurotech, and I was increasingly isolated. The next day, I began methodically documenting every discrepancy I found. If my concerns were dismissed as paranoia, I needed evidence. I tried scheduling time with Patrick, but his assistant kept rescheduling, claiming he was occupied with acquisition strategy sessions. Meanwhile, my access to certain document systems was mysteriously restricted. When I contacted IT, they claimed it was a system update issue that would be resolved soon. It never was. DataCorp's due diligence team arrived on Monday, setting up in our largest conference room. I had prepared extensive documentation and expected to lead the compliance portion of the review. Instead, Stephanie introduced me to the team as handling non-essential compliance matters and relegated me to a supporting role. We want to streamline the process, she explained smoothly to the DataCorp team. Melanie's details are important, but we don't want to burden you with the minutiae. Thomas Reed, DataCorp's chief compliance officer, looked slightly puzzled. We actually need to spend considerable time with the designated attester, he said, looking at me. Regulatory compliance is a key focus area for us. Of course, Stephanie interjected before I could speak. Melanie will be available as needed, but we've prepared summary documentation to make the process more efficient. Jack will walk you through our financial structure first. Jack Thompson, our CFO, had always been pleasant but distant with me. Now he seemed firmly in Stephanie's camp, steering conversations away from my areas of concern whenever I raised them in meetings. After the DataCorp team left for the day, I returned to my office to find my assistant, Brooke, copying files from my cabinet. What are you doing? I asked, startling her. Oh, Stephanie asked me to organize these for tomorrow's session, she replied, flushing slightly. She said you were too busy to handle it. I took the files from her hands. I'll manage my own documentation. Thanks. Brooke hesitated. She won't be happy. That's not your concern, I said firmly. As she left, I noticed she had already copied several confidential attestation forms. That night, I stayed after everyone had gone. My keycard still worked for the main systems, and I needed to understand what was happening. I accessed the financial servers using my still active credentials and began digging deeper into the acquisition documentation. What I found was alarming. A shell company called NT Innovations had been created 6 months ago, apparently housing certain liabilities that weren't being disclosed to DataCorp. The structure was complex enough that it might not be caught in standard due diligence, but it clearly violated both SEC regulations and the specific representations I had already attested to. Even more concerning were emails between Stephanie and Jack discussing keeping certain matters offline from the due diligence team. They referenced meetings that I hadn't been invited to and decisions made without my knowledge. The most disturbing discovery came just before midnight. In a folder marked Transition Planning, I found a document outlining post-acquisition compliance structures. My name was nowhere to be found. Instead, Brooke was listed as the new attester in training with a note that she would complete her certification expeditiously following the acquisition close. They weren't just sidelining me, they were planning to replace me entirely. But why rush the deal through with fraudulent documentation when proper disclosure might only delay, not kill, the acquisition? Datacorp clearly wanted our technology. What was so urgent that it justified such risk? I didn't have answers, but I knew I needed protection. I backed up evidence to my personal encrypted drive, including transaction records, emails, and signature logs showing when my credentials had been used without authorization. As I quietly left the building at 1:30 in the morning, I felt eyes on me. Looking up, I saw Stephanie watching from the executive floor, her silhouette visible through the glass partition. She didn't wave or acknowledge me. She just watched. The game had changed. This wasn't just about preserving my job anymore. It was about protecting myself from becoming the scapegoat for fraud I had no part in. The morning of the final compliance review arrived with a sense of foreboding. I had prepared comprehensive documentation of all the issues I'd discovered, ready to present them to the Datacorp team. My calendar showed a 9:30 meeting with Thomas Reed and their legal counsel in conference room A. At 9:15, my phone rang. It was Amanda from HR, a recent hire I barely knew. "Melanie, can you come to conference room C instead? There's a preliminary matter to discuss." "I have the Datacorp meeting at 9:30, I explained. "Can this wait?" "This will only take a few minutes," she insisted. "Stephanie has already notified the Datacorp team that your meeting will be delayed." Reluctantly, I gathered my materials and headed to conference room C. Inside, Stephanie sat beside Amanda, both wearing carefully neutral expressions. A folder lay on the table between them. "Please, sit down," Amanda said. I remained standing. "What's this about?" "I need to get to the Datacorp meeting." "That won't be necessary," Stephanie said, her voice cool. "We need to discuss a serious breach of your employment contract." My heart began to pound, but I kept my face composed. "What breach?" Amanda slid the folder toward me. "We have evidence that you've been consulting for competitors while employed here. As you know, your contract explicitly forbids any outside employment, particularly with competing entities." Inside the folder was a contract between me and Cognify, a rival neural tech company. My signature was at the bottom, dated 6 months ago. It was an excellent forgery, but a forgery nonetheless. I had never even spoken to anyone at Cognify. "This is fabricated," I said flatly. "I've never had any contact with Cognify." Stephanie's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We discovered your after-hours contract. Box your desk. Security will escort you out." "This is absurd," I protested, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I'm the designated attester for the acquisition. Datacorp needs my certification." "We have contingency plans," Stephanie said dismissively. "Brooke has been working closely with you and understands the processes. She'll handle the transition." "She's not certified," I pointed out. "Federal regulations require a certified attester with at least 2 years of experience." "That's our concern, not yours," Amanda interjected, standing up. "Please surrender your badge and phone. Security is waiting outside." It was happening too fast. I had expected resistance, even conflict, but not this calculated elimination. They had manufactured evidence against me, timed my removal to coincide with the final review, and already planned my replacement. A security guard I didn't recognize stood outside the door. He avoided eye contact as he escorted me to my office to collect my personal items. Colleagues watched in confusion as I packed a box with family photos and a few personal books. No one approached me or asked questions. The message was clear. Association with me was dangerous. As the security guard led me toward the exit, we passed the main conference room where the Datacorp team was waiting. Thomas Reed stepped out, looking at his watch. "Melanie, aren't you joining us for the compliance review?" Before I could answer, Stephanie appeared beside him. "I was just coming to update you. Unfortunately, Melanie is no longer with the company. We've had to terminate her employment for ethical violations." Thomas looked from Stephanie to me. his expression unreadable. Ethical violations? Of what nature? I'm afraid that's a confidential personnel matter, Stephanie said smoothly. But I can assure you, we have documentation. I stood there, my personal belongings in a cardboard box, feeling the weight of professional humiliation. The documents are fabricated, I said clearly, looking directly at Thomas. And you should review the attestations carefully. Many have been altered. That's enough, the security guard said, taking my arm. Where is your designated attester now? Thomas called as I was led away. Federal regulations require. His voice faded as the doors closed behind me. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for several minutes, hands shaking too badly to insert the key. 4 years of building my career at Neurotech ended with a public escort out of the building. My reputation would be in tatters. Who would hire a compliance officer fired for ethical violations? As I finally started the engine, my phone pinged with a text from a number I didn't recognize. This isn't right. Many of us know it. Be careful. At least someone inside still believed in me. But belief alone wouldn't clear my name or stop what was happening. I needed to act, and quickly. At home, I moved in a daze, setting down the box of personal items on my kitchen counter and collapsing onto the couch. The shock was giving way to waves of humiliation and anger. I had been publicly fired, accused of ethical violations, the cardinal sin for a compliance professional. Even if I fought the allegations, the stain would follow me. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from colleagues. What happened? Security just escorted you out? Are you okay? Rumors flying everywhere. Call me when you can. This seems suspicious. I couldn't bring myself to respond yet. What would I say? That I'd been framed by the founder's niece? That would sound like the bitter excuses of a terminated employee. When my phone rang an hour later, I almost didn't answer. The caller ID showed Jessica Morgan, my former law school professor who had become a mentor over the years. She now headed the technology compliance practice at Harrington and Myers, one of the top law firms in the country. Melanie? I just heard from Thomas Reed at DataCorp. What the hell is happening over there? I hadn't spoken to Jessica in months, and the sound of her confident voice broke something inside me. To my horror, I began to cry. They fired me, I managed between sobs. They falsified documents showing I worked for a competitor. They're trying to push through the acquisition with fraudulent attestations. Slow down, Jessica said firmly. Start from the beginning. And Melanie? Record this call. You need to document everything now. For the next hour, I detailed everything. The altered financial disclosures, the shell company, the forged signatures, my sudden termination. This is even worse than Thomas suggested, Jessica said when I finished. He called me because something felt off about your dismissal, especially the timing. He knows you're the legally designated attester for Neurotech. What does that mean exactly? I asked. Stephanie seems to think they can just replace me with my assistant. That's not how it works, Jessica explained. Under Federal Financial Compliance Regulation, Section 428, companies engaged in acquisition activities involving neural technology must designate a qualified compliance officer as their attester. That person must personally verify all disclosures and cannot be replaced during the process, except under extraordinary circumstances with proper notification to regulators. So they can't just fire me and promote Brooke? Not legally, Jessica confirmed. Brooke would need to complete certification, have the requisite experience, and be formally registered with regulators well in advance. There's a 60-day cooling-off period specifically to prevent last-minute switcheroos that might hide improprieties. I felt the first flicker of hope. So the acquisition can't go through without my attestation? Not without significant delays and regulatory scrutiny, Jessica said, which makes their decision to fire you even more suspicious. Let me look at the evidence you gathered. I sent Jessica the files I had backed up, and we agreed to meet the next morning at her office. Before hanging up, she gave me clear instructions. Don't contact anyone at Neurotech. Don't post anything on social media. Don't even update your LinkedIn. We need to move strategically here. After the call, I checked online news. Sure enough, a press release had already been issued. Neurotech announces final stage of acquisition by Datacorp, expected to close within 48 hours. The release mentioned streamlined due diligence and full compliance with all regulatory requirements. Patrick was quoted expressing excitement about this next chapter. There was no mention of my departure. I was about to turn off my computer when an email notification popped up. The tech news site TechWire had published an article. Neurotech acquisition fast-tracked as market questions valuation. The article revealed something I hadn't known. Patrick Adams was dealing with a serious health issue and wanted to complete the sale quickly. Industry analysts were questioning the $800 million valuation, suggesting it was significantly inflated given recent performance metrics. There were also rumors that a rival bid might be emerging, potentially delaying the process. Suddenly, the urgency made more sense. Patrick was ill and wanted to secure his legacy. Stephanie was rushing the deal through before market conditions changed or competitors entered the picture. The inflated valuation explained the accounting manipulations. They weren't just cutting corners. They were actively misrepresenting the company's financial position to justify the price tag. And they needed me gone because I was the one person who could legally prevent it from happening. The next morning, Jessica and I spent 3 hours reviewing every document. Her legal analysis confirmed my worst fears. The altered attestations constituted securities fraud, and as the designated attester, I could face personal liability if the deal went through with my signatures attached. We need to act immediately, Jessica concluded. If this acquisition closes with fraudulent attestations bearing your signature, you could face civil and potentially criminal penalties, even though you didn't authorize the changes. What can we do? I asked. They've already announced the deal is closing tomorrow. We go directly to William Chen, Neurotech's general counsel, Jessica said. William has independent ethical obligations as an attorney. If we present him with clear evidence of fraud, he can't legally ignore it without violating his professional responsibilities. But he reports to Patrick, I pointed out. He could just bury it. Not with this level of evidence, and not with you as the legally designated attester raising the alarm, Jessica assured me. Besides, attorneys have personal liability too. William won't risk his license to protect Stephanie's schemes. We spent the next 2 hours preparing a comprehensive package of evidence, organized chronologically with clear explanations of each violation. Jessica provided a legal memo outlining the regulatory requirements and potential liabilities. Everything went into a distinctive gray envelope with a signed chain of custody document. Are you ready for this? Jessica asked as I prepared to leave. Once you deliver this, there's no going back. Stephanie won't take this lying down. I thought about the 4 years I'd invested in Neurotech, the pride I'd taken in building proper compliance systems, the betrayal I'd experienced. I'm ready, I said. They can't just throw me away and commit fraud using my name. That's my girl. Jessica smiled. Remember, you're not just protecting yourself. You're protecting Patrick's company and all your colleagues from a fraudulent deal that could eventually collapse and leave everyone worse off. With the gray envelope in hand, I headed back to the place I'd been escorted from just 24 hours earlier, ready to fight for my reputation and the integrity of the system I'd built. The security guard at the Neurotech reception desk did a double take when I walked in the next morning. Miss Harper? I thought. Weren't you? I need to see William Chen immediately, I said firmly. It's regarding a legal matter that cannot wait. I'll need to check if you're authorized to enter the building, he said, reaching for his phone. You can check, I replied calmly. But I suggest you tell Mr. Chen that his former designated attester is here with evidence of securities fraud that could expose him to personal liability. I'll wait. His eyes widened slightly, and he made the call. 5 minutes later, William Chen appeared in the lobby. his expression a careful blank. "Melanie, this is unexpected." William had always been cordial but distant with me. As Neurotech's general counsel, he managed legal risk, but had little direct involvement in compliance matters. Now, he looked uncomfortable, glancing around the lobby as if worried about being seen with me. "I need 5 minutes of your time," I said. "It concerns your ethical obligations as company counsel." He hesitated, then nodded curtly. 5 minutes. In the small conference room, as we walked through the office, I felt eyes following us. Conversations paused as we passed. In 24 hours, I had gone from respected compliance officer to company pariah. The small conference room was just off the main corridor, with glass walls that made us visible to everyone walking by. William clearly wanted our meeting to be public knowledge. "I assume this is about your termination," he began once the door closed. "I want to be clear that the company acted within its rights based on clear evidence of misconduct." "This isn't about my termination," I replied, placing the gray envelope on the table. "This is about fraudulent attestations submitted under my signature without my knowledge or consent." William's expression didn't change, but I noticed his hand tighten slightly on his pen. "That's a serious allegation." "It's not an allegation, it's a fact, documented in the materials I've provided." I slid the envelope toward him. "As general counsel, you have an independent ethical obligation to investigate evidence of securities fraud, regardless of who presents it." He made no move to touch the envelope. "Melanie, I understand you're upset about being terminated, but making unfounded accusations won't help your situation." "These aren't unfounded accusations," I said evenly. "They're documented violations of federal regulations that expose both the company and you personally to significant liability. As Neurotech's legally designated attester, I never approved these altered documents. My electronic signature was applied without my authorization. Something in my tone must have registered, because William finally reached for the envelope. "I'll review these materials, but I make no promises about any action. You should be aware that Jessica Morgan at Harrington and Myers has reviewed these documents and prepared a legal opinion on the regulatory violations," I added. "She's standing by for your call." The mention of Jessica's name and her prestigious firm caused William to look up sharply. He knew her reputation. "You've already involved outside counsel?" "I involved outside counsel when I discovered my signatures had been forged on fraudulent documents," I replied. "The acquisition cannot legally proceed with these attestations." William opened the envelope and began scanning the first page of Jessica's memo. His expression remained neutral, but I could see the slight widening of his eyes as he processed the implications. "I need time to review this properly," he said finally. "The press release says the acquisition is closing tomorrow," I reminded him. "There isn't much time." He looked at me directly for the first time. "What exactly do you want, Melanie?" "I want the fraudulent attestations withdrawn immediately," I said. "I want written acknowledgement that my signatures were used without authorization. And I want the DataCorp due diligence team informed of the actual state of Neurotech's finances and compliance status." "That would effectively kill the deal," William observed. "Not necessarily," I countered. "It would require a reset of the due diligence process, and potentially a revaluation. But if DataCorp truly values Neurotech's technology, they'll still want to proceed." William gathered the documents back into the envelope. "I'll need to consult with Patrick." "Of course," I said, standing up. "But remember your independent ethical obligations as an attorney. Knowingly facilitating securities fraud could cost you your license, not just your job." I walked toward the door, then turned back. "One more thing. I've arranged for all this documentation to be held in escrow by Jessica's firm. If the acquisition proceeds without addressing these issues, the information will be forwarded to the SEC and the federal prosecutor's office Monday morning." William's jaw tightened. "That sounds like a threat." "It's not a threat," I replied calmly. It's what an ethical compliance officer is legally obligated to do when they discover fraud. I'm just giving Neurotech the courtesy of addressing it internally first. As I left the conference room, I saw Stephanie standing in the hallway, watching through the glass. Our eyes met, and for a moment, neither of us looked away. Then I turned and walked toward the exit, passing colleagues who whispered as I went by. Just before I reached the door, one of the engineers, Diane, hurried up to me. "Melanie, we all know something's wrong here," she whispered urgently. "Half the engineering team is updating their resumes. This doesn't feel right." "Trust your instincts," I told her. "Document everything you're asked to do." Outside, the autumn air felt clean and bracing after the tension of the office. I had done what I could. Now it was up to William to fulfill his professional obligations. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "You have no idea what you've done or who you're messing with. Patrick built this company from nothing. His legacy deserves better than your petty revenge." It had to be from Stephanie. I didn't respond, but saved the message as evidence of potential intimidation. That evening, as I was reviewing my notes in preparation for potential next steps, my phone rang again. The caller ID showed another unknown number. "Hello? Miss Harper? This is Denise, Patrick Adams' executive assistant." Her voice was hushed, as if she was calling secretly. "I wanted to warn you that Stephanie is on a warpath. She's been in Patrick's office for the last hour, and I heard your name mentioned repeatedly." "Thank you for letting me know," I said, surprised by the call. "There's something else," Denise continued. "Patrick has been very ill. More than most people at the company know. Stephanie has been making most of the decisions for months, telling everyone it's what Patrick wants." "Does Patrick know about the altered attestations?" I asked. "I don't know for sure," Denise admitted. "But I do know he still asks about you sometimes. He always valued your work, even when Stephanie started turning him against you." After hanging up, I sat in silence, processing this new information. Patrick was sicker than I'd realized, and Stephanie had been leveraging his absence to consolidate her own power. The rush to complete the acquisition made even more sense now. If Patrick was truly incapacitated, Stephanie needed to push the deal through before questions arose about company leadership. My phone rang again around 11 p.m. It was Jessica. "William Chen called me," she said without preamble. "He's concerned about the documents you provided. He's requested a meeting tomorrow morning with Patrick, Stephanie, and the DataCorp team." "Do you think he'll actually address the issues?" I asked. "He doesn't have much choice," Jessica replied. "I reminded him that his ethical obligations as an attorney are non-negotiable, and I may have mentioned that my firm represents several DataCorp board members on other matters." For the first time in days, I allowed myself a small smile. "So what happens now?" "We wait," Jessica said. "But I suggest you be ready for anything tomorrow. This isn't over yet." I woke the next morning to breaking news alerts on my phone. "Neurotech acquisition temporarily paused for extended due diligence," read the headline from TechWire. The article quoted anonymous sources saying DataCorp had identified areas requiring additional verification and was committed to thorough compliance review before proceeding. Neurotech stock had dropped 15% in pre-market trading on the news, erasing months of gains that had come with acquisition speculation. My phone rang as I was reading the article. It was Thomas Reed from DataCorp. "Miss Harper, we need to meet as soon as possible," he said, his tone urgent. "Our legal team has reviewed the attestation documents and identified significant discrepancies that require immediate clarification." "I'm no longer employed by Neurotech," I reminded him. "I can't officially represent the company." "We're aware of that," Thomas replied. "That's precisely why we need to speak with you. As the legally designated attester, your role cannot be simply terminated without regulatory notification. Would you be willing to meet us at Harrington and Myers at 11 a.m.? Jessica Morgan has offered to host." "I'll be there," I agreed. Jessica was already waiting when I arrived at her office. "This is moving faster than I expected," she said, ushering me into a conference room. "William Chen called DataCorp's general counsel first thing this morning. Whatever you showed him yesterday must have seriously rattled him." Before I could respond, Thomas Reed arrived with Andrea Lawson, DataCorp's chief legal officer. After brief introductions, Andrea got straight to the point. "Ms. Harper, we have serious concerns about the compliance attestations provided by Neurotech. Several key documents appear to have been materially altered after your initial certification. William Chen has indicated you were terminated yesterday, but our records show no regulatory filing about a change in designated attester status." "That's correct," I confirmed. "I discovered the alterations earlier this week and was terminated immediately after raising concerns internally." Thomas leaned forward. "Can you walk us through exactly what you found?" For the next hour, I detailed everything. The revenue recognition changes, the undisclosed shell company, the financial projections based on contracts that didn't actually exist. Jessica provided supporting documentation from the package we had prepared. Andrea took extensive notes, occasionally exchanging glances with Thomas. "This goes well beyond aggressive pre-deal positioning," she said finally. "If these discrepancies are accurate, they constitute material misrepresentations that would significantly impact valuation." "How did you discover the shell company structure?" Thomas asked. "That wasn't in the materials provided to our due diligence team." I explained my late-night investigation and the hidden folder structure that had contained the information. "And you believe Stephanie Adams orchestrated this?" Andrea asked. "She certainly led the effort," I replied carefully. "But I don't know how much Patrick Adams was aware of or involved in." Thomas shook his head. "We've had minimal contact with Patrick throughout this process. Stephanie has represented that he's been fully engaged, but all our substantive discussions have been with her and the CFO." Andrea's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and frowned. "The Neurotech board has called an emergency session. They're requesting our presence immediately." She looked at me. "Andrea, and they're specifically asking for you to attend as well." Jessica immediately raised her hand. "As Melanie's counsel, I strongly advise against that unless we have clear assurances about the purpose and protections in place." "I understand your concern," Andrea replied. "But as DataCorp's counsel, I can tell you that we will not proceed with any acquisition discussions without the legally designated attester present. If Melanie doesn't attend, we'll be informing the board that we cannot move forward at this time." That changed the dynamics completely. My presence wasn't just requested. It was necessary for the acquisition to have any chance of proceeding. "I'll attend," I decided, but only with Jessica accompanying me as counsel. As we prepared to leave, Thomas pulled me aside. "There's something else you should know. Our technical team has identified potential regulatory compliance issues in Neurotech's core technology that weren't disclosed in any documentation. Issues that could trigger a federal investigation if not properly addressed." My stomach dropped. "What kind of issues?" "Patient data handling protocols that may violate HIPAA," Thomas said grimly, "and algorithmic bias concerns that could trigger FDA review. Did you have visibility into these areas?" I shook my head. Those reviews would have fallen under my purview, but I was systematically excluded from the technical compliance assessments over the last few months. Stephanie kept saying they were still in process and would be provided later. Thomas's expression darkened. "This goes deeper than financial misrepresentations. We're talking about potential public safety concerns." The emergency board meeting was held at Neurotech's headquarters in the executive boardroom. When Jessica and I arrived, the tension in the room was palpable. Patrick Adams sat at the head of the table, looking pale and much thinner than I remembered. Stephanie stood beside him, whispering something in his ear. William Chen sat rigidly nearby, his expression unreadable. The other board members, mostly early investors and one independent director, sat in uncomfortable silence. None of them would meet my eyes as I entered. The DataCorp team arrived moments later. Thomas, Andrea, and their CEO, Robert Donovan. Introductions were made, and Patrick called the meeting to order. We're here to address concerns raised about certain attestations related to the proposed acquisition, Patrick began, his voice weaker than I remembered. William has informed me of potentially serious compliance issues that require immediate attention. Stephanie immediately jumped in. Before we proceed, I think we should address the elephant in the room. Melanie Harper was terminated for cause after we discovered she had been consulting for a competitor. Her presence here is inappropriate and potentially compromises confidential information. That allegation is categorically false, Jessica responded firmly. The supposed evidence was fabricated, and we have proof of that fabrication. Moreover, Miss Harper remains the legally designated attester for neurotech under federal regulations. No proper notification of change was filed with regulators. This is ridiculous, Stephanie snapped. Brooke is handling the attestation responsibilities now. That would be illegal, Andrea interjected calmly. Federal Financial Compliance Regulation, Section 428, explicitly prohibits changing designated attesters during an active acquisition process without proper notification and a 60-day cooling-off period. No such notification was filed. Patrick looked confused. I wasn't aware of that requirement. Stephanie assured me the transition would be seamless. There are many things you haven't been made aware of, Patrick, I said quietly, including altered financial documents, undisclosed shell companies, and potentially serious regulatory violations in patient data handling. The room fell silent. Patrick turned to Stephanie. What is she talking about? Before Stephanie could respond, Thomas Reed stood up. We've identified multiple areas where the due diligence materials provided to us contain material misrepresentations. Most concerning are the compliance attestations that appear to have been altered after Miss Harper's initial certification, without her knowledge or consent. That's absurd, Stephanie protested. Melanie is just bitter about being terminated. She's trying to sabotage the acquisition out of spite. The evidence suggests otherwise, William Chen said, speaking for the first time. I've reviewed the documents Miss Harper provided, and they clearly show unauthorized use of her electronic signature. As general counsel, I have an ethical obligation to report this to the board. Patrick's face had grown increasingly pale. Show me, he demanded. William opened the gray envelope I had given him and began methodically presenting the evidence. With each document, Patrick's expression shifted from confusion to shock to anger. These projections, he said, pointing to a revenue forecast. They show 30% growth in our medical division. But I approved the actual projections showing 15%. Who changed this? No one spoke. But all eyes turned to Stephanie, who maintained her composure. The adjustments were made to reflect the most optimistic scenario based on new market analysis. Standard practice in acquisitions. Not when they misrepresent actual performance, Andrea noted. And certainly not when they're submitted under false attestation. The meeting continued for another hour. As more discrepancies were revealed, the shell company structure, the altered patient data protocols, the undisclosed technical compliance issues. With each revelation, Patrick seemed to physically shrink, the full magnitude of what had been done in his company's name becoming clear. Finally, Robert Donovan, the DataCorp CEO, spoke directly to Patrick. We entered these discussions in good faith, because we believe in your technology and its potential, but we cannot proceed under these circumstances. The discrepancies are too significant, and the compliance issues too serious. What do you need to move forward? Patrick asked, his voice barely audible. Robert glanced at Thomas and Andrea before answering. First, we need proper attestation from your legally designated officer. Without that, we legally cannot proceed, regardless of any other considerations. All eyes turned to me. Where is the designated attester? Robert continued. Because without them, this entire deal is in jeopardy. The silence that followed was deafening. Stephanie glared at me, her face flushed with anger. Patrick looked broken. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. In that moment, I realized the full power of my position. As the designated attester, I alone had the legal authority to certify Neurotech's compliance status. Without my signature, the acquisition could not proceed, no matter how badly Patrick wanted it or how much pressure Stephanie applied. But wielding that power responsibly meant more than just blocking the deal. It meant ensuring that whatever happened next was based on truth and proper compliance. "I'm the designated attester," I said finally, looking directly at Patrick. "And I'm willing to work with both companies to address these issues properly. But only if we start with complete transparency about Neurotech's actual financial position and compliance status." The emergency board meeting extended into the evening as we methodically worked through each discrepancy. Patrick, now fully aware of the magnitude of the deception, insisted on reviewing every altered document personally. "I trusted you," he said to Stephanie during a particularly tense exchange. "I brought you in because you're family. How could you do this?" "I did what was necessary to get the deal done," Stephanie insisted. "The valuation would have dropped significantly if we disclosed every minor issue. I was protecting your legacy." "By committing fraud?" Patrick's voice cracked with emotion. "By risking regulatory investigations and securities violations? That's not protection, Stephanie. That's betrayal." As the evidence mounted, the board's patience with Stephanie visibly eroded. When the discussion turned to the shell company structure designed to hide liabilities, the lead investor, Marcus Winters, finally erupted. "This is textbook securities fraud," he said, glaring at Stephanie. "You've put the entire company at risk, not to mention our personal reputations." I move that Stephanie Adams be immediately removed from all positions within the company, pending a full investigation. The vote was unanimous, with Patrick abstaining, his face a mask of pain and disappointment. Stephanie stood up, her composure finally cracking. "You'll regret this," she said, looking directly at me. "All of you. I was the only one willing to do what was necessary to save this company. Defrauding investors doesn't save companies," I replied calmly. "It destroys them." After Stephanie was escorted from the building, the real work began. Robert Donovan made it clear that DataCorp remained interested in acquiring Neurotech, but only under completely transparent conditions. "We value the core technology and the team that built it," he explained. "But we need to reset this process entirely. New due diligence, new valuation, and proper regulatory compliance." Patrick nodded wearily. "Whatever it takes. I just want to do this right." He turned to me, his eyes reflecting genuine remorse. "Melanie, I owe you an apology. I let Stephanie isolate me from the people who were actually protecting this company. I failed as a leader by not listening to you." "You built something important," I told him. "It's worth saving the right way. Will you come back?" he asked directly. "We need you now more than ever." I glanced at Jessica, who gave me a slight nod. "I'll consider it," I said carefully, "but only under certain conditions." Those conditions became the foundation for my return. Over the next week, as the dust settled, I negotiated terms that gave me full compliance authority, a seat on the board of directors, and equity compensation that recognized my role in saving the company from a potentially disastrous fraud investigation. We announced a 3-month due diligence reset with DataCorp, with me leading the compliance process. The markets initially reacted negatively, with Neurotech's stock dropping another 20%. But as the commitment to transparency became clear, investor confidence gradually returned. The revised acquisition terms valued Neurotech at $650 million rather than $800 million, but it was a valuation based on reality, not fiction. And with proper earn-out provisions tied to actual performance metrics, the final value could potentially exceed the original target. Patrick focused on his health during this period, stepping back from day-to-day operations while remaining involved in strategic decisions. He authorized a full internal investigation, which uncovered additional instances of Stephanie's manipulation. including her systematic efforts to isolate me from key discussions and information. 3 months later, when the proper due diligence was complete and all compliance issues properly addressed, I signed the final attestation certifying Neurotech's regulatory status. This time, every word was accurate, every number verified, every potential issue disclosed and mitigated. The acquisition closed cleanly, with regulatory approval coming through without a single question or concern. DataCorp's integration team worked closely with our engineers to ensure a smooth transition, preserving the culture and innovation that had made Neurotech special, while providing the resources to expand our impact. 6 months after the dramatic board meeting, I was appointed Chief Compliance Officer of the merged entity, responsible for integrating Neurotech's compliance systems with DataCorp's broader framework. My team doubled in size, and I finally had the resources to implement the robust compliance architecture I had always envisioned. As for Stephanie, the board's investigation resulted in a criminal referral for document fraud and securities violations. She ultimately accepted a plea deal that included professional disbarment and community service, avoiding jail time but ending her corporate career. 1 year after the acquisition, Patrick's health had improved enough for him to attend the launch of our next-generation neural interface system, which combined Neurotech's core technology with DataCorp's global distribution capabilities. As we celebrated this milestone, he pulled me aside. "You saved more than the company," he said quietly. "You saved my conscience. I couldn't have lived with myself if that fraudulent deal had gone through, even if I never knew about it." I thought about the journey we'd been through. The betrayal and vindication, the collapse and rebuilding. Sometimes the hardest thing is standing up for what's right, especially when it would be easier to walk away. "I'm grateful you didn't walk away," Patrick said simply. Later that evening, as I drove home from the celebration, I reflected on everything that had happened since that moment when Stephanie had smiled and said those words. "We discovered your after-hours contract. Box your desk." She had thought she was eliminating an obstacle to her plans. Instead, she had inadvertently empowered me to stop a fraud that would have eventually collapsed under regulatory scrutiny, potentially destroying the company and harming hundreds of employees. In business and in life, I'd learned that your reputation and integrity are your most valuable assets. No deal, no matter how lucrative, is worth compromising who you are. Standing firm for what's right may cost you in the short term, but integrity always finds its way back to the surface. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas Reed. "Regulatory review complete. Final clearance granted. None of this would have happened without you." I smiled as I pulled into my driveway. Sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't just save your conscience. It saves everything that matters. Have you ever faced a situation where standing up for what's right felt impossible but necessary? Would you have the courage to risk everything for integrity? Comment below and share your thoughts on ethical dilemmas in the workplace. If you found Melanie's journey inspiring, please like and subscribe for more stories about courage, integrity, and triumph against corporate wrongdoing. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that one person really can make a difference. Thank you for watching. And remember, your integrity is always worth protecting, no matter the cost.